Welcome back, everyone. Today I'm just going to dive straight into it, and today we're talking about punting. Okay, so punting's gotten more and more kind of popular these days. I notice a lot more people are kind of talking about it or kind of going into drafts with the sole strategy of punting one or two categories. Me personally, I'm not a fan of punting. I always tend to kind of have a balanced out team with maybe one or two categories that I do really well in. And I'll talk more about why that is later on. But for now, let's concentrate on punting. You kind of have to understand what punting really is. A lot of people kind of feel that when they say they're punting free throw percentage, that means they're going out and they're purposely, drafting everyone who's really bad at shooting free throws. That's not really what punting is, and you need to understand this. Punting really means I'm just gonna scratch this category from my, draft board, and I'm not even gonna look at it. I'm not gonna bother with it. Whatever happens, happens. But this doesn't automatically mean that you will lose this category every week. It's most likely that you'll lose it more often than not. But again, just winning it here and there is better than nothing. Whereas when you're, drafting with the sole purpose of getting guys that are bad at it, you're not really doing anything. You're purposely doing your best to lose a category every week. And that makes no sense in fantasy. Another thing I just want to quickly point out is that these punting strategies, they're really not for rotisserie leagues. I've never really played rotisserie before, so I wouldn't really be able to give you guys too much analysis there. But from what I understand, coming in last in any one position is a big no-no. You can't come back from something like that, from what I understand. But in head-to-head, this isn't really a big deal. You just have to be winning week in and week out. So since a lot of people were doing this, I went ahead and I kind of did some analysis to begin with. Your kind of intuition is to kind of punt players that kind of have... If you're going to punt one thing, you might as well punt something that is very highly correlated to that thing. That way you're kind of getting the best of both worlds. Or on the opposite side, if you're going heavy in one category, you might as well kind of draft players that tend to do the same, tend to be correlated in other strengths as well, such as, rebounding and blocks. So I just wanted to do some actual statistical analysis to back up my kind of predictions, which was that a lot of these big guys, the DeAndre Jordans, the Andre Drummonds, that if you go with a strategy like them, where you're getting a lot of blocks and you're getting rebounds, obviously, I wanted to just get some evidence for what categories are highly correlated between guys like that and what aren't. And I also kind of wanted to use the correlation table to kind of find the best punting strategy in theory. So after doing that, everything was kind of... my hypothesis was confirmed in that rebounds, blocks, and field goal percentage are all highly correlated. So that was like the number one thing that stood out in the analysis. And secondarily, turnovers, assists, and steals were also almost as highly correlated altogether. Believe it or not, a lot of points weren't really correlated a lot with much, at least relatively speaking. Something like 3-pointers made in points, which you might think should be pretty highly correlated, actually wasn't all that big of a deal. So keeping those things in mind, I guess if you started with a punt strategy of punting free throws, for example, since doing bad in free throws is super highly inversely correlated with blocks and field goal percentage and rebounds, you might, of course, as you might have guessed it, go with a build such as DeAndre Jordan, the Andre Drummonds, that kind of stuff. So furthermore, I kind of said, okay, let's look at this data. What can we do with it? So the strategy in a normal head-to-head league, of course, is to win, but that could mean a variety of different things. Ideally, once you get in the playoffs, all you have to do is beat your opponent each and every week. It doesn't matter by how much you beat them, as long as you're taking victories. And in a 9-category league, that means 5 or more categories you're winning. So one strategy that I wouldn't advise for, but I guess would be from a statistical perspective optimal, would be to just stack up in 5 different categories and just kind of ride out the season that way. And just I guess if you can make your 5 categories so strong, you could win in theory every week those 5 categories. And I guess if you can manage to make playoffs that way, you'll probably win your league once playoff time comes around. So that strategy, given our correlation table, would be to match up to draft heavily high block, high rebound, high field goal percentage guys, and not worry at all about their free throw percentages. And do that early in the draft, as well as draft a lot of these high efficient, not high efficient, but high passing point guards and shooting guards. So what you end up doing is you end up having a team heavily stacked with a lot of big men and a lot of those athletic big men, and a team also just as stacked in point guards, so that you were ideally winning assists, steals, field goal percentage, rebounds, and blocks every week. So this kind of strategy is actually quite reasonably done. If you go to Basketball Monster, I believe you can sort your players given what categories you want to punt. And using one of their rankings there, you can kind of figure out a pretty good build you can get realistically in just about any draft. But again, I would advise against such a strategy because so much of it relies on any one guy. And if, things like injuries come, that will kind of derail your whole season. Also, you're kind of basically giving up 4 categories every week, and you don't really want to do that, especially if you only have like 2 or 4 spots, not 2, but like 4 spots that make it into playoffs. And in those kind of leagues, you really have to be really good throughout the season, finish in that top percentile. Okay, lastly, I want to talk about why I'm not really a big fan of punting. To me, a fantasy season is half about, doing your draft, all the, preparation for the draft, actually going through with it, staying consistent with your picks. And it's just as much, playing the daily waiver wires. And to me, a punting strategy really kind of destroys that second half of fantasy. Having to, seeing a great player on the waivers and having to go through your little, is this guy right for my team? A player like Rudy Gobert would be the perfect example. If you were punting blocks last year, and this guy was on the waiver, and you said, okay, I don't really care about blocks. He's not that big of a deal to me. Well, you just missed out on a top 10, top 15 player just because you punted a category, which he on his own could have probably brought you back in every week, maybe even sometimes win it all on his own. So finding those gems in the waiver wire are really, they're the optimal way to win fantasy. Playing, checking that waiver every single day, seeing box scores, being on top of things, and like leaving such great talent off your team just because you're punting a category is just something I do not do. All right, that wraps up my punting talk for today. I think I kept it under 10 minutes today, so that's good. And see you guys next time.